Again, thank you so much for coming here. First, maybe we could start with a brief introduction of yourself, your field of work, and the research you're doing.
Okay, John Schmalzbauer here, and I am trained as a sociologist of religion in the United States. Of course, sociology of religion has a much broader kind of roots in, Max Weber, Emile Durkheim, Tocqueville, but my focus has been on the United States and also American religious history. But very early in my career, I was pulled into the study of religion on college campuses because there was funding. I took a postdoc in 1996 to work on a study of religion on 4 American college campuses that became a book that I was not an author, but I helped with some of the heavy lifting called Religion on Campus. And then I haven't been able to escape this field. My doctoral dissertation actually was before that, and I looked at religion in 2 professions that people feel were carriers of secularization in the modern world. Journalists in New York and Washington in the media, and also American colleges and universities in the social sciences, and interviewed people who were themselves intensely religious about how did that impact their professional lives. And more recently, now studying the landscape of campus ministry and chaplaincy on American college and university campuses, expanding to look at Christianity on college campuses, but also Jewish life, Muslim life. One site we're looking at calls it Dharmic life, but it's really Hindu chaplaincy at Georgetown. And that's been kind of exciting too, to sort of see the multi-religious United States.
Why do you believe people across different parts of the world consistently seek to introduce religion into what should really remain secular environments?
Well, there's a certain openness to universities. I think it is part of their commitment to dialogue, conversation, and I think religious groups sometimes know this and can opportunistically take advantage of this, sometimes in the spirit of the university and sometimes transgressing it a bit. They will push the boundary sometimes because it is possible. And so to be out on the grass in front of the big campus building with public preaching in places that the landscape architect probably didn't think, oh, I am designing this landscape for preaching. But it is nevertheless used that way, both by evangelicals, by Muslims, by others on college campuses. So I think that's one reason. And then another reason, I think it goes back, at least in the United States, to the history of these universities. Many of them have religious foundings. And even the state universities, there was much more mixing of the religious and secular in their early decades than people remember. Even my university, what is now a religion program that would not be constituted by a church, but it didn't start out that way. And so the first religion courses at my university were taught off campus or next to the campus, and then they hired those chaplains and campus ministers to be the first professors, which you would not do that way today, but it is part of the genealogy of the field of religious studies in the United States even.
Why do you think it's so important for these people or the students to make room for the sacred you wrote in your concept, or as you said, find a home? Why do you think this need is always there?
Well, for some of them, it is not a central identity. And so, they might say, well, I was raised Catholic or I was raised Muslim, but it's not important to me now. But for others, it is what sociologists would call a master status, the most important identity for some of these students. And they have had practice gathering this way before they go to university. There are pipelines to these campus homes, and so some of them might go to a religious camp. The Lutherans have their camps. There's Jewish camps in the Midwest, and sometimes that was because Jews couldn't go to other camps. And sometimes the same person who is the rabbi at the camp out in the woods in the summer for the teenagers is the same person who does religious education on the university campus. And so it's seamless. It is an ecology of religious life. So that's sometimes how they get involved. And then sometimes people get involved because they run into the Dawah table in the student union and learn about Islam, and maybe they are a convert, or sometimes they are a convert to evangelical Christianity, and so the religion finds them.
So, in your research, you've mentioned the coexistence of multiple religious groups, the majorities and the minorities, you've called them, and I wanted to ask, how do they coexist on campuses, and if there's any friction, and if there is, how are they regulated by the universities themselves, if they are at all?
Yeah, the degree of regulation varies on college campuses, and it's often the private, more non-sectarian, non-church-tied universities that have more rules because they're private, so they can make rules like that. And so, you know, do you play well with others? Are you able to go to the council of all the religious groups on campus and get along? And if you can't, then you can't play. But on public university campuses, some people have described the campus that we're studying as a Wild West, that there is not enough regulation, and sometimes this can lead to conflicts. You know, like in our discussion earlier, the question of Israel-Palestine is, you know, not going to be resolved, but it has to be managed as a conversation on these campuses, and is very, very difficult and emotional. That can happen also with some of the evangelical groups. The degree of proselytizing can sometimes cross a line of what the university wants. And so, you know, not knocking on every door in the dormitory, maybe. And so that might be an area of conflict. Or, you know, if you have a street preacher, you know, how loud can they be?
Thank you so much. I have 2 more questions left. Are there any insights from your research that could resonate with the experience of the students and religious groups on university campuses in Africa and beyond, as we have heard from the conference, Remaboko project specifically, and how might the concept of students creating sacred spaces within secular institutions relate to similar dynamics in other cultural or regional contexts?
Well, there are transnational ties to many of the movements that are showing up in the Remaboko project. I mean, there are transnational ties to West African university groups. So some of the groups mentioned in the presentations in Africa, like the International Fellowship of Evangelical Students, have branches in North America, Australia, the UK. And some of them, like the Student Christian movement, have been kind of global. But the flow of influence does not move in one direction with globalization, but it can go in multiple directions. And so now there are influences of you know, universities in Africa influencing religion in the United States. So there is a Somali community in Minnesota. And so one Lutheran university is 11% Lutheran and 12% Muslim, mostly Somali. And that is an influence now changing the religious landscape. And I'm sure that there are universities in Somalia that are part of that story that someone could tease out. I know that's a different part of Africa. And similar influences with South Korea, which is now sending missionaries to the United States to work with Korean evangelicals. And so when I hear some of the language, like one of the presentations talked about industrializing campus ministry, that is eerily similar to the similar kind of language of, you know, Henry Ford's assembly line applied to campus ministry in the United States. And so just tracing these discourses along these international pipelines and networks, but also figuring out who is shaping who and the dialect between them, I think is a project that could move forward in comparative ways.
Beautiful. I don't know if the last question makes any sense. It was more of a personal one. I was just wondering if religious unions or communities are as common on campuses in US as they seem to be in places like Nigeria from your experience.
Well, I think there are a lot, yeah, it depends on what religious union, I think. That may actually come out of some of the same groups that were part of these global movements. Christian and Muslim and otherwise. I think they are as common. You know, at University of Southern California, there are 60 religious groups on campus. University of Minnesota, there are 50. And those are just the groups that the university has a list for. So there's a huge associational life. Now, I think what might be different is, I'm not sure that the the contest for student government of the university, of the student union, not the religious student union, but the student union of the university, where different religious groups have their candidates and there is a very emotional election. I think there's a lot more apathy about student government and leadership on American college campuses. I think people retreat to their silos sometimes. So some might join fraternity and sorority, some might join sports, some might join a Christian group or a Muslim group, but there may not be as much attention on the public square on what they all have in common. Whereas the documentary film that we saw about Niger, there was this intense lobbying to be part of the student government.
Thank you so much.